everyone, it's Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and today I'm sharing with you my first video in a series that's called hashtag Magnificent Melange, which is from the Art Joy of Sharing Facebook group. There's lots of artists in the group who are creating videos this month using that hashtag, which are technique videos so that you can learn some of the basic techniques and ideas if you're starting out with mixed media. My idea, the very most basic thing, the thing that you wear like underwear, under all your art is gesso. What is gesso? It is a preparation of your surface, any surface. It could be a canvas, it could be a recycled cardboard box, it could be a record, it could be a saw blade, it could be something that you want to paint, and you put gesso on it first, and that gives you a surface in which to paint on. It also firms up the surface, makes it a little bit harder. And gesso comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes and bottles. It comes in squeeze bottles, it comes in tubs, it comes in even spray. And I'm showing you some of the ones that I have in my collection currently. I've used all different types. There are two different grades of gesso. One is a student grade, which is less expensive and has less pigment in it, so it can be a little bit more translucent. Then there's, of course, the professional grade, which is for professionals, and it's a little bit more expensive, but definitely worth it. Also all across the board, you might get a thicker or a thinner, more scratchy, more smooth surface depending on the brand. That's 100% on the brand. But every company that makes any type of art products for mixed media or for acrylic painting or basically any type of media sells a gesso. So there's a ton of it out there. And so here I am swatching out the ones that I have just to give you an idea. The difference between the student grade versus the professional grade, the difference between the colors. Gesso comes pre-colored in black, and there's clear, there's gold, there's red, there's all kinds of different colors of gesso. So you have a lot of options to purchase them. And also, as you'll see me doing in this little swatching session, you can tint your own, and you just use the basic gesso and then put some acrylic paint with it to make it a tinted gesso. So you don't really have to buy all the different colors. It isn't necessary. You can make them yourself. So that's what this video is about, and I'm going to show you some techniques. I'm going to be doing some demonstrations. If you want to see this in real time with me talking through the entire thing like a demonstration, there is a copy of it over on the Art Joy of Sharing live streaming channel. It's not a live stream, it is a recorded, but it's exactly like a recorded live stream because I was talking through the whole thing, explaining what I was doing, and it really goes more into depth on this topic because here I am trying to talk as fast as I can. One more thing, gesso is generally very matte, with the exception of this gold, obviously, because it's got mica in it, and it's opaque. The student grade's a little bit less opaque, but the professional grade is very opaque. So it's a great surface prep. You can put it on anything, and then of course you can put any media over the top of it. It doesn't have to just go with acrylic. You can put watercolor, water-based stuff over it. You can put alcohol ink over it. You can put oil paint over it. So there's just the little comparisons of the different gessos that I currently have in my stash. There's so many out there. There's a million. There's a trillion. There's a gazillion. So it's just something that you need, just like a good bra and some good underwear. You got to have a foundation. Got to have a primer. You got to do the very basic thing first. So a nice bottle of a good quality white gesso is something that you need in your arsenal. So the most common thing that I see mixed media artists doing with gesso is to use it for reduction. Say you have something that's printed with black text, or you have something that's very bright. You use a little bit of watered down gesso over the top, and now you've prepared your surface for the next layer. Another thing that's very common to use it for is unification. You have just collaged on a bunch of different crazy things, and you want them to be more unified. You can use your finger or a brush. You can make shapes stand out by doing that, and it's really great for that. So it's something you can use it for, very commonly seen. So another thing that is interesting about gesso, say you have a very porous surface like this watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is designed to be absorbent. It's designed to stain. And so if you are making a art journal yourself out of watercolor paper, of course you're going to want to gesso your pages when you're using them. But another fun thing about that is if you miss a spot or if you intentionally just put gesso in some areas on a porous paper and not others, you get a resist technique. And this is where the areas that have gesso on them become lighter, stay lighter, because they resist the pigment that you're putting over the top. Now, during my demonstrations in this video, I use a lot of different products just to give you an idea of things that you can use over gesso. You're not limited by any means. Some people think, oh, it's just for acrylic paint because it is called acrylic gesso these days, but that's not true. So another way that you can do a resist technique is to put the gesso through a stencil, either with a sponge or with a spatula or palette knife, and it again will resist the media that you put over the top. Watercolor, definitely. Any water media it will resist. It'll also resist alcohol, ink, and stuff like that. So fun to do some resist techniques with watercolor or other media, wet media, with gesso. Another thing that gesso is very useful for is for stamping in white, in a solid, nice white, over a dark surface. You can do this on your paintings, you can do this on your pages, you can do it over cardstock or something like that, inky paper. Painty paper, in this case, this is some deli paper with some scraped blue paints over it that were left over on my palette. I didn't want to waste them. You can do it with a chunky stamp, or you can do it with a very fine stamp too. Just make sure that you clean that gesso off the stamps very soon. You don't want to get it dried on there because then it's a real pain to get off. So that's white stamping with gesso. Another option, another technique that you can do with gesso is to make a lot of fun textures with it. For this, I'm using the heavy gesso that I have. It's a professional gesso from Liquitex because it's easier to put a thick coat on and get a really fun texture with it. I just scratched. This is just scratching into the gesso with a skewer. You could use a ball stylish. You could use a dull pencil that doesn't make marks anymore. And that makes really fun texture. This time I put some water-based ink sprays over it just to give you an idea of how it brings out the texture in the scratching. You can also do that, make like a more linear design, a more interesting grid design or linear stripes or something by using an old credit card to scratch into the gesso and make your texture that way. I really like how that looks. This time I'm using some fluid acrylic paint. I was having a little trouble getting it out of the bottle, but fluid acrylic paint with a little bit of water, and suddenly you have such an interesting texture to start out your composition. I'm making obviously altered tags with these because that's a good thing for me to demonstrate with. I have a ton of them, so they're manila cardstock is what it's made out of, with the exception of the one watercolor one that I did. Another type of texture you can do is just plain brush strokes. This gives your background a painterly effect. So even if you're painting over it with watercolor, it's still going to have those brush strokes and interesting shapes and textures in it if you give it a good brush stroke roughing up and let it dry. This time I'm just using some heavy body acrylic over the top of it, just so that you can see what the brush strokes look like. And that's just some Dina Wakley paint, heavy body acrylic. And you can see how painterly it is even with just one coat of acrylic over the top. Pretty cool. The next one is combs, texturing tools. There are a ton of texturing tools out there that you can buy. Sometimes they come with your jelly plate if you happen to have bought one in a kit, but you can make your own by just taking a credit card and trimming off the edge of it with some scissors in a zigzag pattern, or you can use decorative shears that have scallops and things to make your own combs. So there's certainly no reason to buy one. And I used this comb into my gesso to scratch it, and then this time I'm using some gelato pigment sticks to just color over it, and it really does pick up the texture because the gelato goes down into the scratches really well. And I blended it with a wet paper towel. So that's another technique you can do to start out your composition. The next one is using saran wrap or plastic wrap to make a texture by just squishing it onto the wet gesso and letting it dry. This time I'm bringing out the texture by using my new Pearl alcohol inks. I bought 3 colors that I thought I might enjoy just to find out what these pearly inks are like. I've got some 91% isopropyl alcohol in the spray bottle to help it blend a little bit, and that brings out the interesting texture of the saran wrap that dried into the gesso. Great way to make some interesting textures. This one is about palette knives and how you can make interesting knife marks with gesso so easily, and it dries. It's almost like making a plaster wall. You know how you can make different textures. Sometimes they have sponge texture or palm texture, different types of textures. It's like that, and it's a lot of fun. So the dried one is almost like a flower, and I'm using some India ink over it. India ink dries permanent, so it's great for mixed media, but it also can kind of behave like a watercolor, so you can mix it with a little bit of water and make it sink down into the grooves of the texture. And then the areas of the tag that don't have any gesso on them are a lot darker in this one because the paper absorbed the India ink on the edges around where there wasn't any gesso. So pretty fun. Next one is all about, I forget. Oh, I know. Embedding things in gesso, using it as not only a glue, but also a sealer. So I'm embedding some rice, just, white rice that you cook, into the gesso. And here's my dried one. And I'm going to go over it with my new Distress Oxide sprays in a few different colors. I just got these, and so I thought I would spray them on there. It brings out the rice texture pretty cool, and I put some water on there, which makes it oxidize, makes it have that kind of white, chalky look over the top of it. And also I splattered it a little bit, and was having fun with that spray. But brings out the texture of the rice really well. I also embedded some lace and some string into gesso just to give you an idea. You could use sand, you could use shells, you could use anything that's small and light enough that you can stick it down into your first layer of gesso and then paint over the top of it with some more gesso to embed it and seal it in there. And then it makes a really cool, fun texture. These are the dazzling metallic paints from Deco Art. These are acrylic paints, very metallic-y, that I'm going over my little embedded string with to show you what it would look like with some metallic acrylic. I was just, trying a lot of different products that I had laying around and seeing how they worked over the gesso so that you could really get a good idea of what gesso is for and how you use it in mixed media. This is a different set of watercolors. These are more like gouache, which is, it's just a little bit different consistency of watercolors, still watercolors though. And I went over the lace, the embedded lace with that. And you can make it go down into the pieces or you can leave some white. It was a lot of fun. So there's the pieces that I embedded. Obviously, there's 1,000 more things you could do along that line that we could just go on and on for days. This one is just plain splatter. The walls that we have remind me of this. Like, sometimes they put that what they call popcorn texture on there, and it looks a lot like this. This is a fun thing to do on a large canvas when you want a lot of texture. You can just sit there with your chip brush and just flick it. Of course, it makes a huge mess, but that's okay. That's the fun part. So that is with some fluid acrylic over it, golden high flow fluid acrylic. So this texture is about making shapes with the gesso. And here I am making some little flowers with the gesso and a flexible palette knife. This is a lot of fun. You can do a lot of fun stuff with this. Yeah. So the one that I have dried has hearts on it. I made little palette knife hearts with the gesso. And I'm just going to paint over it. And I'm using some heavy body acrylic paint in a couple different metallic colors. And then once that's dry, I spray it with some spray. And because it's so textured, the metallic comes out kind of in the shapes and the spray sinks down in. So it's pretty fun to do that. It's kind of a two-tone effect with a true mixed media of acrylic paint and water-based sprays. So I thought that turned out really cool. Fun to make shapes with gesso. A lot of fun. So here I'm talking about clear gesso. I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, but it does come in clear. And it makes a great sealer if you have a water-based media on something and you know that you're going to want to put it into some sort of a layer where it's going to get wet with another media. You can certainly use your brayer and just brayer over the top of that piece with clear gesso. It doesn't change the color of it, maybe even makes it a little bit more intense. And now it's sealed and I can use that piece of painty paper in collage. Another thing that you can do if you're doing maybe some card making or you just need a space where you're going to put something, you're going to write it, maybe it's on your art journal page and you need a space to write your journaling, or maybe it's just on a layer of a card, or maybe it's wherever, you can put some gesso over the top of something bright and make a layer of paint, and you can even scratch into it if you want to. And that's a pretty interesting and fun way to do something. So yeah, it's good for that too. This last one I was talking about how you can use watercolor glazes over something that you weren't very happy with. This is just literally a piece of trash that's on the floor. This is some deli paper. And say you don't like parts of it. And if it's even if it's a painting that you did and you just don't like parts of it, you can gesso out parts of it, get it good and dry, and then you can go over the top of it with watercolor glazes. And what's great about this is it's so easy to manipulate the watercolor over the top of the gesso. You can lift it with your damp brush. You can blend it on the edges. You can do everything because the gesso is so forgiving. You're not getting stained paper at all. So you can make some really great painty paper. And then if you want to use this sometime in mixed media, you can just seal it with a coat of clear gesso and you've got another piece of painty paper to use in your collage or as a background on your art journal page or in a junk journal. So I hope you've enjoyed it. This is it for me for this gesso everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask video. Here's a picture of all of them. And I will see you later. Bye-bye.